Hi, I'm Zoe. The day after my wedding, my mother-in-law came to my house holding a pen already uncapped. She said, "Let's make this quick. Sign it over. Everything your grandfather left you. You won't need it in this family." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stared at the notary and realized they planned this before the vows were even said. They didn't know I'd stayed silent for a reason. They didn't know I'd inherited far more than a company, and they had no idea what silence was about to cost them. Before we dive in, what time are you listening and where are you tuning in from? Drop a comment. I read everyone. The sheets still smelled like lilies and champagne. Dean's arm was heavy across my stomach, his breath even and warm against the back of my neck. He was still asleep, peaceful, unaware. I stayed still, eyes open in the dimness of the master bedroom at his family's estate just outside Austin. I hadn't told him. Lying there, one hand tucked under my pillow, I thought about it again, the sealed folder buried deep in my suitcase. The company my grandfather built brick by brick in the shadows of Texas oil fields. It was mine now, legally, quietly, entirely. He died 2 years ago, just after my parents stopped calling. I remember standing beside his hospice bed, holding his frail hand as he pulled me close and whispered, "Don't speak of what's sacred until you know who's safe." That was his last sentence. And I listened. God knows I've always listened more than I've spoken. No one in my family, not my mother, not my father, not my older sisters, knew he'd left me everything. They believed his company went under a decade ago. That's what they told everyone after he refused to sell it off like the rest of the family begged him to, but he never did. And now it was sitting in trust under my name. Outside the window, the Texas sun was just beginning to light the horizon in soft pinks. I gently moved Dean's arm, slipped out of bed, and padded quietly to the bathroom. I needed to breathe. It was supposed to be the day after our wedding, our first full morning as husband and wife. I expected coffee, maybe a walk around the grounds, not what came next. By the time I'd showered and dressed, the house had already come alive with muffled voices and soft footsteps. But instead of a warm welcome or breakfast with the in-laws, a housemaid knocked gently on the door and said, "Mrs. Celeste is waiting for you downstairs in the drawing room. She called me Mrs. Dean Whitlow." The words felt tight around my chest. I followed the long corridor down past oil paintings of Dean's ancestors and tables lined with cut crystal. The air smelled like lemon polish and old money. Celeste was already seated when I entered. Her posture was perfect, legs crossed at the ankle, pearls gleaming in the morning light. A man in a dark suit stood silently beside her. On the table, a leather folder, a silver notary seal, and an uncapped pen. "Good morning, darling," Celeste said, her voice smooth as warm syrup. "Let's formalize your role in the household. Just a formality." I smiled, blinking twice before I moved toward the table. The man beside her said nothing, just slid the folder toward me. It was already opened to the signature page. Something inside me cooled. The kind of chill that doesn't touch your skin, but slides down your spine. I sat slowly, picked up the paper. The title read, "Durable Power of Attorney, Domestic, and Financial Affairs." My fingers paused at the edges. The language was written in legal ease, but I could read between the lines. "This is interesting," I said softly, flipping through the pages like I hadn't seen that phrase before. "Mind if I review it with my attorney?" Celeste's smile didn't break, but her eyes did, just for a breath. It was subtle, the flicker of irritation. If I hadn't spent my whole life reading silence, I would have missed it. "Of course," she said, voice still sweet. "It's just a family thing. No pressure at all." I nodded politely and closed the folder. I'd grown up being the quiet one, the overlooked daughter, the one who didn't argue, didn't push, didn't take up space. But that never meant I wasn't watching, listening, filing away the small cracks in people's masks. And in that moment, I knew exactly how they saw me. A sweet little Southern bride who just married into their old money world without a dollar to her name. Not a threat, not a force. Perfect. That afternoon, I made polite conversation with guests trickling out from the weekend festivities, smiled. For pictures, wrote thank you notes in my journal to transcribe into cards later. I played my part perfectly. By the time the sun dipped below the line of cypress trees and the cicadas started humming, Dean and I were back in the guest wing. He was loosening his tie when he glanced over and asked, "Did you and Mom talk today?" I didn't skip a beat. We had tea. He smiled, kissed the side of my head, and started unbuttoning his shirt like nothing in the world was off. But I walked to my suitcase, unzipped the false lining, and pulled out the sealed manila folder thick with documents embossed with my grandfather's initials. I held it in both hands for a moment, then whispered, "Thank you, Grandpa." When I closed the suitcase again, I caught sight of the pen Celeste had left behind, still uncapped, resting on the table in the corner like it was waiting for a different kind of signature. She smiled when I refused, but her eyes said, "You'll regret this." That look stayed with me through the next morning, clinging like smoke. I woke in Dean's childhood bedroom, our temporary honeymoon suite, according to Celeste, with the strange sense that something had shifted in the air. The windows were open, bird song drifting in, but the bed felt colder somehow. Dean was gone. I pulled on a robe and headed downstairs. The house was oddly quiet for a place that had just hosted a wedding. I walked past the formal dining room, where Dean had promised a family brunch. Just us and the people who matter. There were no smells of bacon or biscuits, no clinking dishes, no laughter, only the low hum of someone vacuuming upstairs. In the kitchen, I found a note in Celeste's handwriting, looped and tight. "Brunch canceled. Some things came up. We'll reschedule." I opened the fridge. The fruit tray I made the night before was missing. So was the champagne I'd chilled. In the foyer, I noticed the stack of wedding gifts by the stairs was gone. "Hey," I called as Dean walked in from the patio, golf cap in hand. "What happened to brunch?" He kissed my cheek like nothing was odd. "Oh, Mom thought it'd be too much. Said, she wanted you to rest. Well, do something next week." "And the gifts?" He blinked. "She's reorganizing the sunroom. Probably moved them there." I smiled, nodded. But in my chest, something tightened. It wasn't the missing breakfast or the gifts. It was the way the walls felt closer than they had yesterday, like I was slowly being pushed to the edges of my own life. Later that afternoon, while folding the last of our laundry, I thought of a moment 2 years ago when I last sat alone with my grandfather. We'd been in his garden, him pruning a stubborn rose bush, me shelling pecans. He had paused mid-trim, stared at the sky, and said, "Some people love power so much they forget how to love people." I'd looked at him, unsure what sparked the thought. "If you ever get to hold something valuable," he added softly, "don't let them think that's what you are, or they'll treat you like a tool, or worse, an obstacle." I'd nodded, not quite grasping what he meant. Now I did. 3 days into my marriage, I understood. That evening, while Dean was on a call with his cousin, Celeste summoned me to the driveway. She stood beside a sleek silver SUV, ribbon wrapped tight across the hood. "Surprise," she beamed. "Your wedding gift from us." It was beautiful. Clean lines, leather seats, gleaming in the sunset. I thanked her genuinely until I saw the small envelope she handed over. "The title paperwork," she said lightly. I opened it. Her name was on the deed. Not mine, not even Dean's. "You're welcome to use it as your own," she added. "Of course, legally, it stays in the family." Before I could respond, she produced another folder. "And just a bit of housekeeping about aligning family assets. I know it's a lot of legal blah blah, but our attorney says it makes everything cleaner." I flipped through the first few pages, Terms like asset access, power of substitution, and joint holdings danced across the print like warning signs. I smiled, again, calmly. I'll need to have my attorney review this, just protocol. She didn't protest, not out loud, but her jaw flexed. That night, back in the bedroom, I sat on the bed while Dean changed out of his golf clothes. He chatted about his cousin's new house, their plans to invest in a car wash franchise. I didn't bring up the car or the contract. Instead, I listened. Listened the way my grandfather taught me to listen, not just to words, but to patterns. Later, brushing my teeth, I heard Celeste through the thin bathroom wall. She was on the phone whispering. "No, not yet," she said low. "She's not as pliable as I thought, but give it time. Every girl cracks once you control the assets." I turned off the faucet. My pulse slowed, not out of fear, out of certainty. It wasn't just my name missing from that title. It was a test, and I'd passed it. The next morning, I told Dean I needed some air, just a walk, maybe a coffee. He kissed my temple, barely looking up from his iPad. Instead of heading toward the park, I walked 2 blocks, then got into a rental car I'd booked the night before under my maiden name. I drove to an office building on the edge of town, a place with tall windows and a sign that Rettel and Co-work. I swiped in, took the elevator to the 3rd floor, settled at a desk that smelled faintly of lavender and old coffee, opened my laptop. There it was, my company dashboard. Sales up 11% from last quarter. Subscriber growth steady. New partnership offers flagged for review. I opened a fresh page in my private journal. Typed slowly, steadily. Do not react emotionally. Observe, protect, wait. Then after a pause, they think silence means submission. But silence is just space. To listen. To plan. I closed the laptop. My eyes drifted to the window, the sun slipping lower into the trees. I knew now exactly what kind of game I was in, and I wasn't about to fold. The first check cleared from my account without my permission. It was just past 8 a.m. I was sipping my lukewarm coffee at the co-working space when I glanced at the notification on my phone. At first, I assumed it was a routine monthly charge, maybe the grocery delivery or a utility bill Dean had put on autopay. But the moment I opened the alert and saw the figure, $18,000, I sat up straighter. "See advisory," it read. I didn't recognize the name. I opened the bank app, heart picking up pace. The transaction had cleared from our joint account. I dialed Dean without thinking. He answered with a cheerful, "Hey, babe," like nothing was wrong in the world. "What's C advisory?" I asked. There was a pause, just long enough for me to hear a soft intake of breath on his end. "Oh, that it's just a setup fee," he said casually. "For Mom's consulting firm. You moved $18,000 without telling me?" He chuckled as if I'd overreacted. "I thought it was fine. It's just to get things rolling for her. You know, she's trying to build her thing again." I swallowed my frustration. We agreed. No financial decisions from the joint account unless we both signed off. Remember? "I mean, come on," he said. "We're married now, Zoe. We're family. Everything doesn't have to be so formal anymore. Don't you trust me?" Trust. That word stuck in my throat like a bone. I stared at the line item again. C advisory. I ended the call before I said something I'd regret. The rest of the morning, I couldn't shake the unease. Between responding to client emails and reviewing product reports, I opened another tab and typed the name into a business registry. It was quiet in the co-working lounge, just the occasional hum of a printer, the distant click of keyboards. I searched the name again, this time with Texas's public record site, and there it was. C Advisory LLC, formed 2 months before the wedding. Dean listed as co-signer. Celeste, my mother-in-law, was the registered agent. I clicked through every available document. The business address was their family estate. The listed purpose: business asset transition services. That phrase repeated on every page over and over. Not consulting, not coaching. Transition. My hands were still on the keyboard, but my body felt suddenly distant, like I just walked into a room that looked familiar, only to realize all the furniture had been rearranged without my knowledge. What was being transitioned, and to whom? Back in our apartment that evening, Dean acted like nothing happened. He passed me a glass of wine, mentioned something about trying a new Thai place next weekend. I nodded and smiled like any normal wife would. Inside, though, my thoughts were racing. I remembered what my grandfather once told me on one of those quiet Sunday afternoons when he'd invite me to the sunroom just to talk. Don't let your silence make them think you're stupid. Let it. Make them careless. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I returned to the estate for dinner. It had been planned days ago. Celeste's famous Friday family dinners, roast chicken, linen napkins, soft jazz humming in the background. It was all too perfect. Halfway through the meal, I folded my napkins slowly and said, "By the way, I came across something interesting while I was doing some routine searches." Dean looked up from his plate. "What's that?" "Che advisory," I said evenly. Celeste paused, fork in hand, just a flicker. Her eyes didn't widen, but her jaw clenched, barely noticeable. Dean let out a nervous chuckle. "She's been Googling again," he teased. I smiled. "I always do my due diligence. It's a habit." Silence lingered a little too long after that. Celeste eventually cleared her throat and changed the subject to garden renovations. I let her. I'd planted the seed. Later that night, after helping clear the dishes and politely declining a nightcap, I left the estate and drove toward the city center. I didn't go home. Instead, I parked outside the modest glass building where I'd quietly rented a private desk. The space was half empty at that hour. A few startup founders were still grinding away, blue light reflecting in their glasses. I settled into my usual corner, opened my encrypted financial dashboard, and began the transfer. $2.4 million. I moved it into a new holding entity, Shiloh Holdings. I'd had the LLC filed through a separate legal team months ago. Delaware-based, quiet, clean, shielded. I chose the name for a reason. Shiloh was the name of my grandfather's childhood dog. The only living thing he said had never asked anything of him. As the wire initiated, I opened my journal and wrote in block letters. They think they're playing chess, but they haven't even found the board. I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair, breathing slowly, not in fear, but in clarity, because I finally understood what was happening and who was behind it. But I didn't know the second transfer was already in motion, this time from the house itself. It was late morning. I was finishing a draft proposal in my home office, the sunlight spilling across my keyboard. My tea had gone cold beside me, but I didn't care. I was too focused. Then the doorbell rang twice, short, sharp. I pushed back my chair slowly. Through the peephole, I saw her. Celeste with her usual pearl earrings, smug expression, and the notary from the wedding standing just behind her. Same suit, same clipboard. My stomach went taut. I opened the door without a word. "Well, good morning, darling." Celeste beamed. "We figured we'd catch you before lunch. We just need a quick signature." The notary gave me a polite nod. In his hand, a single-page document. Celeste held it out as though offering cookies. "It's just a small formality," she said, stepping inside without waiting for my invite. "A deed transfer, purely administrative, protects the family home, legally speaking." I didn't move to take the paper yet. My mind ran in sharp loops. "This house is already protected," I said quietly. "I bought it outright. No liens, no mortgage." Celeste waved off my words like a gnat. "Exactly. That's the point. Since it's part of the marital household now, it makes sense for Dean's name to be on it," Ours technically for tax purposes. You'd be surprised how many deductions we can get. Trust me, I've done this before. I finally took the document, scanning the top line, my name, the address, then transfer of title to Dean Hampton and Celeste Hampton as joint owners. I looked up and the notary is here for. She smiled wider. Sweetheart, we're just making it official, quick and easy. You'll feel so much better when it's all settled. A sound came from the hallway. Footsteps. Dean, he entered barefoot, rubbing, sleep from his eyes. Hey, babe, he muttered, glancing at the document in my hand. It's no big deal. Mom explained it. No big deal? I asked, keeping my voice even. You're signing my house over to you and your mother. Dean exhaled. It's not like that. You're making it sound shady. I folded the document calmly. Isn't it? Celeste tilted her head. Zoe, we're your family. You're acting like a stranger. I thought we agreed to keep assets separate, I said, meeting Dean's eyes. That was our understanding before we got married. Dean shrugged. Plans change. We're a unit now, aren't we? Why are you being so formal? Because I see you now. I didn't say it, but something inside me cooled, like a thread had been snipped. Whatever. Warmth I'd felt toward this so-called new family shrank into a pinpoint. I nodded slowly, folding the deed again. I'll think about it. Celeste's smile flickered for a half-second. Of course, take your time, but do let us know soon. These things are best done quickly before fiscal deadlines roll in. After they left, I stood at the window for a long time, the deed in my hand. A breeze moved the curtains gently, but the weight, I felt, was anything but light. That afternoon, I drove into downtown. I didn't tell Dean. I stopped by a small law office tucked between a dentist's office and a local boutique. The receptionist looked up as I walked in. She didn't ask why I was there. She just asked who I was here to see. Anyone familiar with Texas property law? I said. They paired me with a man named Elijah Corbin, mid-50s, calm eyes, wore a bolo tie. I placed the folded deed on the table. Can you tell me what this would mean if I signed it? He scanned it silently, line by line, then looked at me. You'd be transferring legal ownership of the house, he said. Full rights. If they choose to sell, refinance, or borrow against it, they could without needing your consent. And the house was purchased under my premarital trust, I added. He raised an eyebrow. Then they'd need to prove spousal entitlement or cohabitation, intent with joint assets. But you said it was in a trust. I nodded. I funded it through an LLC tied to my grandfather's legacy trust. His demeanor changed. Do you have the original trust documents? I do, and there's a clause my grandfather insisted on. No assets under that trust can be reassigned or transferred without board review. He nodded slowly. Then signing this deed wouldn't just risk your house. It could trigger a breach, but it also gives you leverage. That night, I returned home just after sunset. Dean was in the living room watching football, acting as if nothing had happened. I didn't say a word. In the quiet of my office, I opened my fireproof safe, placed the unsigned deed inside, labeled it, locked it again. Then I opened my laptop, found the email my grandfather's lawyer had once sent me back when I turned 25, and first assumed partial control of the holdings. His name, Thomas Denham, still practicing, still loyal to my grandfather's memory. I typed slowly. Subject line, family property inquiry. Attached, I included a scanned copy of the deed, a short note, no dramatics, just facts. Then I hit send. My hands didn't shake. I didn't burn the paper. I just lit the fuse under the fantasy they tried to build. Brick by stolen brick. That was Thursday. By Saturday morning, Dean had seemingly reset himself like nothing had happened. He leaned against the kitchen doorway in his favorite gray Henley, watching me pour coffee, and said with a cheery tone that didn't match the tension from earlier, "Let's grab brunch today. Just us. No moms, no lawyers." I glanced over the rim of my mug. Brunch? Yeah. He smiled, slipping his phone into his pocket. Thought it might be nice to reconnect. Reset. The word echoed. Reset. Like I was a device he could just reboot, erase. My memory, and everything would run smoothly again. Still, I agreed. I needed to see what version of him would show up next. He picked a cafe downtown, casual but overpriced, the kind of place that served eggs on cutting boards and called toast. Artisan. We were seated near the window, and as sunlight filtered through, Dean folded his hands like he was about to lead a team meeting. "You've been working like crazy," he said, pouring syrup over pancakes he barely touched. "I'm proud of you, babe. Seriously." His smile was too polished, too even. Like he'd practiced it in the mirror before showing up. "Thanks," I replied, stirring my iced coffee slowly. "You said you wanted to talk." "Yeah," he said, then hesitated. "You know, this house stuff with Mom, the trust. I didn't mean for it to come off like we were ganging up on you." I tilted my head. "You weren't?" Dean chuckled nervously. "Okay, maybe it wasn't the best way to bring it up, but I was thinking now that we're married, it might make sense to consider, I don't know, starting a family." I blinked. "That's a leap." He reached for my hand. "I mean it. We're a team, right? We should plan for the future, protect our legacy." The word made my stomach tighten. Then his phone buzzed on the table. The screen lit up. I caught it just for a second, but it was enough. Mariel J. He flipped it over with practiced ease, then gave a sheepish grin. "Work?" "She's a coordinator from our old agency. Always blowing up my phone." "Uh-huh," I said. He pulled his hand back. "Anyway, I was thinking maybe we put the company into a family trust. You know, streamline things, tax benefits, future kids, that kind of thing." I didn't say anything at first, just looked at him. Really looked. Then I asked, "Which family?" Dean blinked. "What?" "You said, family trust. So which family? Yours and Celeste's or mine?" He laughed awkwardly like he hadn't expected pushback. "Ours, of course. I just meant it as a safety measure." "A safety measure for whom?" I kept my voice even because my name's on that company alone. Dean's jaw tightened. "I didn't mean anything by it, Zoe. You're being cautious," I offered. He sighed. "Look, it's not about control. It's about building something together. Faster, faster." There it was again. That urgency, that greed beneath the gloss. "What would you do?" I said slowly. "If the company didn't exist," he blinked again. "What if the company disappeared tomorrow? Would you still be here?" "Of course I would," he said quickly, then added, "But with it, we could really go places." And there it was. That future he kept speaking about, as if he'd already budgeted it out. I nodded, pretending to consider it. But inside, something settled. That night, after we got back home, and he drifted off watching basketball in bed, I quietly slipped into my office, turned on the lamp, and opened the drawer where my prenup lived, untouched since the wedding. The paper crackled faintly as I unfolded it. My grandfather had insisted on adding layers I didn't understand back then. I remembered thinking it was overkill, even paranoid. But I trusted him. And now, reading line by line, I found it. In the event that a marital partner attempts to modify ownership or control of protected trust assets through direct or indirect legal instruments, including but not limited to deeds, transfers, or trusts, an automatic freeze will be triggered, pending trustee board review. I exhaled through my nose, quiet and sharp. He had seen this coming, not Dean specifically, but the type. I sat back in my chair and whispered, "Thank you." The next morning, I didn't mention anything. Let the air stay light. Let Dean think we'd moved on. But that night, just after midnight, I stirred when I heard him whispering, I didn't move, just listened. His voice was low, barely audible, but I caught the cadence. No, she hasn't signed anything yet, but I'll get it. Just a matter of time. I slipped my hand under the pillow, pulled my phone out, and hit record. One line. That's all I needed. He thought I was sleeping, but I was already awake, just not the way he expected. I didn't flinch when the bedroom door clicked shut behind him. I didn't turn when his footsteps faded down the hall. Instead, I lay still, facing the window, watching the faintest hint of dawn press against the curtains like a truth too tired to hide. By the time Dean returned to the room, I had tucked my expression into a soft, familiar shape. When he leaned down to kiss my cheek, I stirred just enough to mumble something sleepy, sweet, trusting. He smiled. I smiled back. The next morning unfolded like a quiet performance. I brewed coffee, toasted bread, and slid scrambled eggs onto his plate, careful not to overcook them, just how he liked. He sat at the kitchen counter, scrolling through his phone like the man of the house. "You're spoiling me," he said between bites. I laughed lightly. "It's a special occasion. You made it through brunch without mentioning stocks." He grinned, kissed me on the forehead, then grabbed his jacket. "Be good today." "Always," I replied. I watched the front door close behind him. I kept watching even after the engine faded down the street. I stood there until my own breath reminded me I hadn't moved in minutes. Then I did. I walked to my office and opened the encrypted folder I hadn't touched in years, the one labeled with my grandfather's initials. Inside was a digital copy of the prenup. I downloaded it, scrolled slowly, and began highlighting every clause that dealt with asset control, power of attorney, and marital leverage. The language was sharp, surgical, the kind of clarity born from decades of building empires and dodging vultures. My eyes narrowed at one section in particular. I flagged it, then opened the desk drawer and pulled out a small black case. Inside, 2 compact hidden cameras. One went into the corner of my study, masked by a ceramic vase. The other I tucked into the guest room lamp, angled to capture any whispered strategy. Then came the backup. Emails, voicemails, transaction logs, all silently uploaded to a private cloud. It wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. I'd learned the difference the hard way. Around noon, I slid on a navy blazer and left the house. I didn't tell Dean I had an appointment downtown. He assumed I'd be painting or maybe shopping for gallery supplies. Let him assume. The building hadn't changed. Same brass nameplate, same slow elevator. The law office sat on the 7th floor, tucked behind frosted glass and oil paintings of West Texas. Mr. Ellison stood when I entered. His handshake was warm, but his eyes read me like a report. "Zoe," he said gently, gesturing for me to sit. "Your grandfather asked me to keep a folder for you. I never thought we'd need it." "I didn't either," I replied, my voice calm, but edged, but something changed. He waited as I pulled my phone from my coat pocket and hit play. Dean's voice came through, hushed and urgent. "She hasn't signed anything yet, but I'll get it." Ellison didn't ask questions. He simply exhaled and opened the cabinet behind him. From a locked drawer, he retrieved a sealed envelope and passed it across the desk. "Your grandfather called it a just-in-case packet," he said. "If charm ever turns to chess, give her this." I opened the envelope and pulled out a slim file labeled Postmarital Amendment Trigger Protocol. Inside was a clause I'd never seen before. Not in the prenup, not in the trust documents. This was hidden, dormant, but binding. If a spouse was found to be manipulating or attempting to access trust assets under false pretense of love or partnership, the prenup would be voided. In its place, a corporate freeze. All shares, property rights, and influence would be placed into a temporary legal lock only accessible by the trust's original heir. Me? He really thought of everything? I murmured, my throat tight with something between gratitude and grief. Ellison nodded, He always worried someone would try to love you for your name, not for you. Not because you were weak, but because you were kind. And kindness is easy to target. I didn't cry. I didn't blink. I just looked him in the eye and said, "Let's start the process." We spent hours drafting the amendment packet. Every asset I owned under the company name, every dollar, deed, and share would be temporarily restricted from marital claims, voting rights, too. The only key was mine. Ellison's team moved swiftly but cautiously. "You have to act before he tries to file anything jointly," one of the junior lawyers warned. I nodded. "I will." It was late afternoon by the time I got back home. The sun had dipped just low enough to paint the house in honey-cold light. From the front step, I could smell something cooking. Inside, Dean was in the kitchen, humming. A pot of chili bubbled on the stove, and he looked up as I entered. "Hey, stranger," he said, cheerful. "I thought I'd make dinner tonight. My way of saying thanks for brunch." I slipped off my shoes and walked to the kettle, poured myself a cup of herbal tea. He turned to stir the pot. "We're a team, right?" I sipped slowly, then looked at him over the rim of my cup. "I guess we'll see soon." He chuckled, not catching the weight behind the words. An hour later, he excused himself to run a few errands. He kissed my cheek and said he wouldn't be long. The second the front door closed, I moved to my office and opened the monitoring dashboard on my laptop. One alert popped up. Courthouse Wi-Fi access. His phone had just connected. I didn't wait. I opened the secure folder, attached the prepared amendment documents, and hit send. The confirmation screen blinked once. By the time he raised his pen to file, mine had already rewritten the future. I wasn't at the courthouse, but I didn't need to be. Dean walked in like a man who thought he still had the upper hand. Clean-shaven, crisp shirt, folder tucked neatly under one arm. I could almost hear his voice from here. That light, smug tone he used with waiters, clerks, anyone he thought stood beneath him. "This should be simple," he probably said, handing over the papers like he was doing the system a favor. But this time, the system spoke back. "There's already a legal freeze in place, sir." According to my lawyer, the clerk barely looked up from her screen when she said it. Dean blinked, confused, then leaned forward as if his ears had failed him. He asked again, slower, firmer. The clerk turned her monitor toward him. "Filed this morning, 9:17 a.m. by Zoe Thornwright." They said his face drained of color. He stepped back like the floor had tilted under him. He pulled out his phone immediately, dialing his mother. Straight to voicemail. Tried again. Still nothing. Then he called me twice. I let it ring. Instead, I sat calmly in a downtown boardroom, surrounded by people who knew the full truth. People I'd trusted long before Dean ever showed up. The walls were glass, but the air inside was thick with decisions. At the head of the table, I reviewed the packet again. Legal advisors flanked both sides. Across from me sat my mentor, arms folded, gaze steady. At the far end, the estate lawyer, Mr. Pelam, adjusted his glasses and nodded once. "This amendment," he said, tapping the document, "ensures no spouse can exert influence over this company unless they were a financial contributor or a founding shareholder." The board voted one by one, all in favor. When it came to me, I signed without hesitation. The pen didn't tremble in my hand. My ring, still on my finger, caught the light for a moment. I didn't look at it, not once. "Motion carried," Mr. Pelham said. I exhaled slowly, the kind of breath you hold for years without knowing it. He wasn't just cut off from my estate. He was cut off from the influence he thought he married into. But there was more. Mr. Pelham slid a second folder across the table. It was older. The pages slightly yellowed but well preserved. "My grandfather left this to be opened only under certain conditions," I said quietly. "And you met them," Pelham replied. "Everyone inside were documents, some stamped, others initialed in my grandfather's familiar hand. Quiet moves made years ago. Turns out he'd transferred 26% voting rights to me. Not just in the main company Dean knew about, but in two others. He didn't. Smaller, silent subsidiaries parked under shell entities. Together, they gave me control of 81%. That meant I wasn't just the CEO now. I was the majority. No vote could override mine. No shareholder could outpace me. "You're now the final decision maker," the lawyer said. I nodded once. I didn't smile. Across town, Dean wasn't celebrating. He came home like a storm without rain. Fast, loud, empty. I'd already been gone for hours. There was nothing waiting for him but silence and one envelope on the counter. Inside was a photograph from our wedding day. He wouldn't recognize anything unusual at first, just the standard posed image. But zoomed in, right there in the crook of his mother's elbow, was a detail he'd missed. An uncapped pen in her purse during our vows under the photo, a note in my handwriting. "You never asked me what I inherited. You just assumed I wouldn't know how to protect it." Dean tore through the house, upstairs, down the hall, throwing open doors, closets empty, desk drawers bare, the safe in the bedroom open, vacant. His name had already been scrubbed off the property deed. He called his mother again. Voicemail. Again, no answer. Then 3 sharp knocks at the front door. He opened it with a face still halfway between disbelief and denial. Mr. Dean Westbrook. The officer extended a thick manila folder. "You've been served." And just like that, everything he assumed was his collapsed. He thought marriage was a transaction. I reminded him contracts can protect more than money. They protect dignity. The judge adjusted his glasses and looked directly at Dean's legal team. "Everything you've presented is irrelevant. Her filings were signed, notarized, and submitted prior to the marriage. The court views the trust as separate property and the prenup adjustments as legally binding." Dean shifted in his chair. His jaw tightened as if trying to grind down the disbelief rising behind his eyes. His attorney leaned over, whispering something that only made his expression harden more. "She outmaneuvered you, didn't she?" The judge added almost conversationally. I didn't speak. I didn't even glance at Dean. I just watched the truth land in real time. He hadn't just underestimated me. He'd misunderstood the entire foundation of what we had. I wasn't protecting money. I was protecting identity, legacy, and my silence. He turned slightly toward me, eyes narrowing. His lawyer's voice cracked just a bit. "Did you know she'd done all this before the wedding?" Dean said nothing. Later that day, as the courthouse thinned and the legal back and forth turned to dry paperwork, my mind drifted years back. It was early morning. My wedding dress hadn't even been steamed yet. I stood alone in my grandfather's garden, the sun barely touching the petals of his prized white camellias. In my hand was a velvet box, small, simple. Inside were 2 rings, one engraved with our initials, delicate and hopeful. The other was heavier than it looked, a solid gold band with a plain exterior. Hidden inside was a microchip no one could see, embedded just beneath the surface. I remembered his voice, steady and low that morning over tea. "A wedding is love, sure, but it's also structure. Never agree to a contract you didn't write. Never put your name where your values weren't invited." I hadn't planned to weaponize that advice, but I had followed it. 2 weeks before I walked down the aisle, I made a temporary transfer of all my personal shares to a silent partner. On paper, I owned nothing. On paper, love was all I brought. Dean never questioned it. He was too busy making sure the guest list included his mother's old tennis friends and an overpriced string quartet. Now, with the divorce petition incoming, those shares had quietly transferred back to me under an irrevocable clause. The firm overseeing the shift had already submitted confirmation to the court. Dean's lawyer, young, probably bright in another setting, attempted one last push. "This smells like fraud." The judge didn't even blink. "It smells like preparation." Big difference. The courthouse echoed with the final tap of his gavel. Case adjourned for now. That afternoon, while the legal paperwork circulated and Dean's team tried to regroup, he did what he always did when things spun out of his control. He burst in. I was in my office looking over quarterly reports with my operations lead. The door slammed open. He didn't knock. Was any of this real to you? He snapped. I raised my eyes from the page. What are you talking about? He took a step forward. The trusts, the shares, the prenups, all of it. Was I just part of your grand strategy? I stood up, not out of fear, out of finality. Dean, I married you, not your bank account, but you and your mother. You came into that marriage like it was a corporate acquisition. She didn't attend the ceremony to celebrate us. She came to assess me like a threat. Dean's jaw tensed again. You tricked me. No, I said calm. You never thought I could be anything more than a placeholder. I didn't trick you, Dean. I protected what was mine. You just assumed it was yours to manage. I pulled off my ring quietly without fanfare and placed it on the table. It made a small cold sound on the wood. He stared at it, then turned and walked out. He didn't touch it. Later that evening, I asked my assistant to find the appropriate address. Dean's mother hadn't returned a single call, but I knew she'd be home, sitting in that white leather chair she always bragged about. I packaged the ring with care. No note, no emotion, just a sentence on stiff cardstock slid inside the box. Next time, bring a capped pen, not a pre-written script. I sent it overnight. The following morning, I returned to my quiet apartment. The skyline had started to glow orange with the rising sun casting long shadows across the living room. My assistant was already there, flipping through reports. Ma'am, she said, handing me a folder. You'll want to see this. The company's post-restructuring profits were up by a lot. I didn't smile. I didn't say anything. I just sat by the window, opened the folder, closed it again, and let the silence settle over me. It felt deserved. Then I checked my phone. One new message from my grandfather's attorney. The land deal he'd been working on for years. It had finally gone through. The title was in my name now. He'd be proud. The message read, and I believe that the ring may be gone, but what I rebuilt with bare hands, that legacy, no one could steal. 3 weeks had passed. Papers were signed, stamped, filed. My name, Zoe Hart, stood alone on every document that mattered. Dean's last appeal had been denied. His lawyer barely looked up when the judge issued the final ruling. No shares, no stake, no residual claim to the company, the estate, or even the memories. Just a name he could no longer access, and a life he had never truly earned. My attorney shook my hand gently. You're free. I nodded. I didn't smile. I didn't pop champagne. I didn't even breathe deeper. Instead, I left the law office, walked straight past the elevators, and made my way to the parking structure where my car had been waiting. The air outside still carried the sting of early spring, caught somewhere between renewal and the final bite of winter. It felt appropriate. Instead of heading home, I took the long way down familiar roads, past neighborhoods that had grown and changed while I wasn't looking. Eventually, I pulled up to the corner lot where the gas station still stood. Well, what remained of it? The pumps had been removed weeks ago. Construction fencing wrapped around the building like a bandage, but inside things were taking shape. The moment I stepped in, the scent of sawdust and old oil hit me. It wasn't unpleasant. It was memory. I walked to the back wall just past the service counter and glanced around. One of the bricks near the baseboard looked slightly out of place. Mortar chipped at the edges like it had been lifted once before. Out of instinct, I knelt and pressed my palm to it. It gave a little. I wiggled it loose. Behind it sat a small envelope yellowed at the edges. My fingers trembled slightly as I pulled it out. Inside was a photo. I couldn't help but smile. I must have been 4, sitting cross-legged on my grandfather's lap, his grease-stained hands steadying me while I giggled at something out of frame. In the background, that same station stood proud, unchanged. Tucked behind the photo was a folded "I." His handwriting was unmistakable, tight, upright, no nonsense. "This isn't an inheritance, Zoe. It's a mirror. Build something that reflects who you are, not what they expect you to be." I stood there for a long time, just breathing. That weekend, I came back, not with blueprints or business plans, but with folding chairs and a crew of volunteers. We opened the station, not as a business, but as a community space. My assistant helped convert the back room into a free library. A friend from the local food pantry suggested setting up a voucher program for single moms needing gas for job interviews and childcare pickups. We didn't advertise. We didn't brand. People just came. One afternoon, as I was restocking a shelf of kids' books, a woman in her 60s walked in holding a bag of fresh muffins. "I heard what you're doing here," she said. "You could have sold this place and disappeared. Why stay?" I looked at her for a beat because I wanted to remember where the real value is. She nodded. "Well, you're making a difference and not the kind you can deposit." We shared a quiet laugh and she left the bag on the counter. Later that week, I ran into Dean. It wasn't planned. It wasn't even expected. I'd stopped by a downtown cafe for a late lunch. He was at a nearby table, hunched over, reading a crumpled printout. His suit didn't fit right anymore. Too loose at the shoulders, wrinkled around the knees. He looked up and our eyes met. He stood, hesitated, then approached. "I guess congratulations are in order," he said, voice flat. I didn't respond. He asked, "Was it worth it?" I took a slow breath. Not the money, the clarity. He shifted uncomfortably, like he wanted to say more. Argue maybe, but instead he simply turned and walked away. And just like that chapter of my life closed. A few evenings later, I returned to the cemetery. I'd waited until sunset. The sky was strewn with soft gold and lavender. The grass was damp under my shoes. I knelt by my grandfather's stone, still solid, still unassuming. I laid 3 things gently beside the marker. My first, a copy of the new company charter, leaner, cleaner, more human. Second, the photo from the envelope, his hands holding me steady, reminding me where I came from. And third, my old wedding ring. I rested it atop the paper, watching it glint in the fading light. "I almost forgot who I was," I whispered. "But you didn't. Thank you for planning for the day I wouldn't see the storm coming." I stayed there as the sky turned darker. I wasn't crying, I wasn't aching, I was remembering. And that felt enough. That night back home, I didn't turn on the TV or answer emails. I just lit a small candle by the window the way he used to when the power went out. It wasn't for mourning, it was for honoring. Outside, the city glowed, soft lights in distant windows. Cars rolling by, lives moving forward. They wanted the company, they wanted the land, they wanted the name. But what I really inherited was myself. Have you ever stayed quiet just long enough to let someone reveal who they really are? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone,